So I'd now like to move on to Dr. David Harrison, who's going to talk about the London Footways, mapping better routes to station. David's probably familiar to you all. He's a vice chair of London Living Streets and, along with Emma Griffin, a co-founder of London Footways. So over to you, David.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this excellent event. Just a little bit about the London Living Streets Footways idea, which I developed with Emma Griffin in particular, but with great help from Jeremy and other people at London Living Streets. What we're essentially about is creating a network of routes. And this then we put together to form a map. And you can see some of that in the background. It's particularly about getting between key destinations in London in an enjoyable way. It's about enjoyable everyday walking. And the links often now in central London are really very good, but the severance between central London and the railway stations and the difficulty of getting into the railway stations can be a serious problem, which I'll explore. So the idea is simply that if people enjoy walking, our basic idea is if people can enjoy walking, they will do it. It is, in the words of Chris Martin, who spoke earlier, the idea of sustainable hedonism, or should it be hedonistic sustainability? If people are going to walk, and it's a lovely thing, and the places within central London are quite small, and they can be walked relatively easily often, especially from mainline stations to, say, Covent Garden or whatever, but it has to be nice. It has to be more fun than the alternatives. So here we are looking at some of the things we've tried to do. Link key destinations, King's Cross, the British Museum, and campaign also for improvements. We have some lovely streets, we have some lovely links, but they need to be better. Here are the routes. And what I hope you'll like about this, this paper map, which was generously funded by TfL, and if you go to our website, there is also a digital map which you can expand, which is perhaps more easy to interrogate. But the point about this map was to show London potentially from a pedestrian's point of view. And we think this is the first map there's been for pedestrian everyday walking, where the roads which you can see, the main roads which you can see in white, are looked at in a slightly different perspective. They fade into the background, the red routes come to the foreground, and you can see London as a pedestrian, with a pedestrian's priority. The distances, as we show here, are really quite short. So that, for example, Euston to the British Museum by foot is 19 minutes. In a taxi, it's only 17 minutes. And by public transport, it is 16 minutes. So once you take into account having to go down to the tube or queue up to the taxi or sit in the traffic jam, walking can be just as quick and nicer. I must say that when we first published this map, there was a MERS question from a taxi driver complaining about the times, which was quite interesting. But improvements are needed. Not all the routes are perfect, but there are severe problems at stations. Let's look at Bloomsbury. Obviously, as Christian said, around King's Cross was always was not very pleasant in the 19th century, but Bloomsbury itself was absolutely charming. And you can see here it's got even nicer. So you can see Gordon Square, top left, Judd Street now with the traffic removed, Brunswick Square, right-hand corner, where Camden have made some superb improvements. Bottom left, Lamb's Conduit Street, a delight to walk to. In the centre at the bottom, Woburn Walk, late 18th century London's most delightful shopping street, which is a great way of coming southeast from Euston. And in the bottom right, Red Lion Street with its new filter. Enables you really to walk all the way from St Pancras to Lincoln's Inn Field on the most beautiful walking conditions. But the problem is, as you arrive at these stations, there is very little idea that you can effortlessly walk southwards. As you arrive, they obviously are driven to go by public transport. As you can see on the right-hand side, here is St Pancras Station, I think 1867, beautifully restored. The problem is that that the great ramp that leads up to St Pancras, which people used to entrance it by, is now simply a route for cars and taxis of the wealthy to get to the new station. So what you have with the beautifully restored St Pancras is in fact a beautiful hotel with a terribly sad pedestrian exit. This is people on Eurostar. So if you look at the top left, you can see a little underground sign. This is where you come out if you want to be brave enough to struggle southwards to all those beautiful routes in Bloomsbury. And if you look at the bottom left, that is what you see if you're a pedestrian. So you come out, you've just arrived from the continent on the Eurostar, and these two square holes, these rabbit warrens, say, welcome to London. Euston has similar problems. I hear what Christian said about them being badly designed, and obviously the entrance to the great Hardwick Doric Arch, built 1833 to 37, was taking traffic of all kinds. But at least you knew where you were going. You knew how to get to the station and how to get away from it and southwards into Euston Square. There was a vocabulary of architecture that said, this is the entrance, this is the exit, you go through here, you know where you're going. And look what they did in the 60s and 70s. They turned Euston Station into a place which was sort of hidden, where you could scarcely know how to get in and how to get out. At the top, you see Drummond Street was running east-west. Drummond Street disappeared here. And then to make matters worse, you have this office block put in the 70s in front of it. As you exit Euston Station now, you have no sense of the joy of Bloomsbury beyond and the fact that you might walk effortlessly there. In fact, you just walk into a station. Fortunately, we are hearing from Grimshaw's later, and I'm so looking forward to how they're going to improve this situation. It should be great. Sorry, we've... King's Cross is in many respects ideal. There have been huge improvements here. It's a fantastic concourse. You can see where you're going. You leave along this beautiful concourse. It is fantastic. The railway people have done everything they can. But then look at the mess you come out of. As you come out of that concourse and head south, looking at Argyle Square, you see what you see on the far left. Guardrails you can't cross, no invitation whatsoever to walk southwards. Clearly the needs of motor traffic have been prioritised over that of pedestrians. To cross the south, you have to go over St Pancras Road heading westwards, and you'll see that you actually have to cross quite a busy road before you can then even turn south. So you've got the junction road between St Pancras and King's Cross, busy, traffic turning quickly into it. At the very least, you'd have thought that all the motor traffic would have to enter from the north and turn around and go back northward, so you could have a more seamless pedestrian journey. Let's look at Waterloo. Fabulous arch, celebratory arch here. Looks great. But look at the top right. Look at the appalling clutter that greets any pedestrian wanting to head south. Who would think, oh yes, I think I'll walk over Waterloo Bridge? You're greeted by this, you're put off. Obviously, you're going to catch the tube for a very short and unnecessary journey. And then if you want to walk over Waterloo Station, this is what you're greeted with as you approach it. You can't even do that if you're disabled. The difficulty of it all, the lack of thought gone into it. Again, it's not so much the station's fault, it's the highway authorities. And of course, once you're onto Waterloo Bridge, if you can fight your way through all that clutter, that disappointing entrance to the bridge, you have the most wonderful views in the world, looking towards St Paul's and the city. But getting there, let's create an environment where we want to walk there, where we're led to and encouraged to. Paddington, the journey from Mayfair to Paddington should be one of the great joys. You go through Hyde Park, you come out of Hyde Park, but then really you're met with something so disappointing. This is Sussex Place, which you come across first on the right. It's not too bad, but I mean, it's not something that you really want to walk. And then you're in London Street, and it is all just a mess. I mean, you struggle through, but you don't want to walk, do you? So just to say, it can be better. In the centre and left, this is Nimes. This is what the approach to railway stations should be like. This long boulevard that takes you from the centre of Nimes to the railway station. This is where you want to walk. This is the gold standard of what we should have. But I also ought to say that that London stations are by no means the worst, and I'm sure that other people will have their contributions. But I would have thought the approach to Oxford Station must be possibly the worst in the country. So thank you very much, and that's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. That was absolutely fantastic and a really, really brilliant critique of the core issues involved in tonight's conversation. And I think it was really nice you ended with Nimes, because I think that picked up on a comment that Mark Philpott had made earlier about how even at small stations, the Dutch have an ability to make the walking, cycling entrance to the stations really attractive. So yeah, work needed in England, and take some cues from Europe.